If you followed men's fashion in 2007, Mohr was hard to miss and even harder to place. In a Paris photograph from the Dior Homme after show, he does not look like someone being introduced to the industry. He looks like someone the industry caught before he had time to turn away. Tattoos across his chest, sharp face, no clean-cut polish. A year later, Forbes ranked him 4th on its list of successful male models. Marc Jacobs put him in both the men's and women's Marc by Marc Jacobs campaigns. Hedi Slimane kept photographing him. For a short, charged window, fashion treated Cole as one of the faces of a new masculine image. Then the pace changed. The bookings became less constant. The silence around him grew louder, and people started turning Mohr into a story before they understood the person. Michael Mohr came from Houston, Texas, and nothing about that detail needed dressing up. He did not enter fashion with the clean, polished look that usually made a male model easy to place. He looked like someone who had already lived outside the room before he was asked to stand in it. That was part of what made him difficult to ignore from the beginning. The tattoos were part of that first impression. Across his chest were the words April, May, June, written in block letters that became almost as familiar as his face. Fashion could photograph the tattoo, crop around it, and build a mood from it, but the meaning still stayed with him. Cole gave people the image without handing over everything behind it. That distance became part of the appeal. A model is often expected to disappear into the clothes, the lighting, and the story a brand wants to tell. Cole could do the job, but he never looked empty inside the frame. There was always a sense that something private had followed him into the picture, and that made the image feel less manufactured. By the time he entered the market, menswear was already shifting. The old commercial male model, broad and clean-cut, still had a place. But the sharper side of fashion was starting to prefer slimmer bodies, narrower faces, and boys who looked closer to music scenes than fitness campaigns. Cole fit that change without looking like anyone had dressed him up for it. Fashion did not need to invent him. His look already carried attitude before a stylist touched it, and the tattoos gave his body a private history that no campaign could fully explain. Cole stepped into fashion with a face that felt larger than the job. He looked like a character before anyone had written a role for him. That made him exciting, and it also made the career fragile from the start. The more specific the image becomes, the harder it can be to carry when fashion starts looking somewhere else. Cole's career began the way fashion likes its discovery stories to begin. Quick, strange, and almost too simple. Around 2006, he was spotted near Park Avenue and 20th Street in New York. There was no dramatic open call, no long public buildup, no carefully shaped introduction. Just Cole on a street corner, and someone in the industry seeing something that did not look like everything else. After that, things moved fast. His early work brought him into the Dior Homme world, where Hedi Slimane had already changed the shape of men's fashion. For a new male model, that was a serious entrance. Dior Homme gave Cole more than a booking. It placed him inside one of the strongest menswear images of the time. By late 2007, Models.com was already describing him as one of the heavily booked male models of that moment. Prada, Burberry, Marc by Marc Jacobs, V, and Arena Homes International were already part of the conversation around him. Those names mattered because they showed how quickly his face was moving through different parts of fashion. He was not only being tested in one corner of the industry, he was being used across runway, campaign, editorial, and magazine work almost at once. His representation grew too. Cole moved through agencies in New York and Europe, which showed that the interest around him was larger than one city or one designer's taste. Fashion can talk about instinct and discovery, but bookings are still practical. A model keeps moving when people believe the face can work in more than one place. Cole's face could do that because it changed depending on who was looking at it. On a runway, he had the sharpness needed for clothes that were built around attitude. In editorials, he looked like there was already a story sitting under the skin. In photographs, he did not need to push very hard. He could look fragile in one frame, then cold and confrontational in the next. Early on, that looked like range. He could stand inside polished luxury and still make the image feel a little unsettled. He could wear expensive clothes without looking softened by them. The clothes gained edge from him, and he gained power from the clothes. For a while, the exchange worked cleanly. The Park Avenue story stayed useful because it matched the image. Ordinary public space, sudden attention, and a young man who still looked unscripted, even after fashion began building around him. Before Mohr became part of Hedi Slimane's world, Slaman had already changed the way menswear looked. At Dior Homme, he pushed the body into a slimmer, narrower shape. The suits were cut close, the shoulders looked sharper, and the old idea of heavy masculine tailoring suddenly felt out of step. The mood came from music, nightlife, and boys who looked like they had been found outside a club rather than prepared in a showroom. That world needed a different kind of model. Slimane was drawn to faces that looked as if they belonged somewhere before fashion found them. The boys were young, slim, and angular, with style that felt lived in instead of styled from scratch. They did not look like they were waiting for permission to be interesting. They already carried something with them when they walked into the frame. Cole fit that world almost too well. His body had the narrow shape. His face had the sharpness. His tattoos gave him the kind of edge brands often try to create after the fact. In Slimane's photographs, Cole did not look like someone wearing the clothes for a job. He looked like one of the reasons the clothes had been made that way. Dior Homme also gave his image control. Without that kind of frame, tattoos and attitude could have been treated like a gimmick. With Slimane, they became part of something precise. The clothes were clean, the photography was stripped back, and the casting had a clear point of view. Cole's roughness worked because it sat inside a world that knew exactly how to use it. By the late 2000s, the phrase "it boy" started to follow models like him. It sounded light, but it pointed to a real change in men's fashion. Male models were being asked to carry more than the clothes. They brought the mood with them: skinny jeans, club nights, indie bands, cigarettes outside venues, and a softer line between masculine and feminine beauty. Cole became one of the clearest faces of that mood because he never looked neutral. His image had edges. That was what made the early years feel so charged. Hedi Slimane knew how powerful a specific face could be in menswear, and Cole gave that world a face people remembered. The Marc by Marc Jacobs Fall 2008 campaign pushed Mohr into a different kind of attention. Marc Jacobs used him on both the men's and women's sides of the line, with Jürgen Teller photographing the campaign. For a male model at that time, the choice was unusual enough to travel through fashion media. Cole was not only wearing the clothes. His body was being used to test a boundary. Most campaigns still kept neatly in place. When Teen Vogue covered the women's campaign, the focus was on the surprise of seeing him in those pieces: mini dresses, jewelry, a checked peacoat, and other looks from the women's line. The images did not try to hide the fact that Cole was Cole. His masculinity stayed visible inside clothing that was usually sold through a different kind of body, and that was where the tension came from. That is why the campaign still feels sharp. On another model, the styling could have turned soft or playful. On Cole, it stayed more difficult. The tattoos, the angles in his face, and the way he carried himself kept the images from feeling like a joke. He looked like himself, which made the clothes feel stranger and more serious at the same time. Marc Jacobs had always been comfortable pushing fashion into less expected places. Jürgen Teller's photography made the idea feel even more direct. His images often kept the awkward pose, the harsh flash, the plain room, and the slightly uncomfortable feeling that other campaigns would smooth away. Cole did not need much added to make the point work. He already brought enough friction into the frame. For Cole, the campaign made his image larger. He was no longer only connected to Dior Homme or the tattooed menswear look. He became one of the few male models whose face and body could move into women's wear without losing their charge. The campaign did not turn him into a mainstream celebrity, but inside fashion, it made his outline harder to miss. The campaign also narrowed the way people described him. Androgyny, tattoos, punk energy, and the Marc Jacobs images kept following his name because they were easy to remember and easy to repeat. Cole's Marc Jacobs moment still stands because it caught him at one of the strongest points in his career. Useful to men's fashion, unexpected in women's fashion, and still private enough that the image did not give everything away. Cole's peak arrived quickly, and the work behind it was solid. He opened Dior Homme Autumn-Winter 2007 and closed Lanvin Autumn-Winter 2008. Prada, Burberry, Valentino, Comme des Garçons, H&M, Alexander Wang, and Marc by Marc Jacobs all became part of his run. His face was moving through the kind of shows, campaigns, and editorials that gave a model real weight inside fashion. In 2008, Forbes ranked him fourth among the most successful male models. A year later, he was still part of that global conversation. That did not mean the average person on the street knew his name. It meant that inside fashion, the people who booked, photographed, styled, and watched models knew exactly who he was. The magazine work made the image last longer. Vogue Italia, Vogue Homes Japan, V, Arena Home Plus, W, and other titles gave him space beyond the runway. A show can pass in minutes. A campaign can fade with the season, but a strong editorial can stay in the visual memory of an era, especially when the model already looks like he belongs to a story. Cole could give photographers different versions of the same strange pull. In one image, he could look harsh and almost cold. In another, he could look young, tired, amused, or completely distant. His face caught light in a severe way, but his expression often kept the picture from turning flat. He made male beauty look bruised without needing the image to explain why. That suited the late 2000s perfectly. Fashion liked thin bodies, messy hair, hard flash, expensive clothes worn with a careless edge, and faces that looked as if they had come from somewhere loud and late. Years later, people would give that world a cleaner name and call it indie sleaze. At the time, it was simply the mood around a certain corner of fashion. Cole fit that mood so closely that looking back can make his rise seem inevitable. But careers do not move that neatly. Plenty of unusual faces appear for a season and then vanish from the center. Cole stayed visible because one strong job kept leading to another. The bookings stacked up, and for a while, the industry kept making room for him. Inside that rush, the person can get lost. A young model becomes a reference before he has time to understand what people are turning him into. The work comes as flights, fittings, hotel rooms, call times, long days, short nights, and cameras pointed at every angle. The audience sees a clean trail of images. The person inside it lives through the speed, pressure, luck, and exhaustion that the images never show. At the height, fashion was still moving toward him. His face was in the right rooms, on the right pages, and inside the right conversations. For that moment, fashion wanted him there. Cole's image did not stay inside campaigns. It moved through the other parts of late 2000s fashion too. Blogs, party photos, backstage videos, quick interviews, and little clips passed around by people who wanted fashion to feel closer and less controlled than a magazine spread. In 2008, Models.com placed him among the tattooed male models who were starting to define a visible trend. It was a small mention, but it showed how quickly his body had become part of the way fashion was looking at men. The tattooed boy was no longer outside the room. He had become one of the images the room wanted to use. Cole also had the kind of presence that made casual moments feel useful. He looked interesting standing still, walking out of a show, smoking, talking, or appearing for a few seconds in a grainy party video. For a while, that off-duty version of him carried almost as much weight as the polished work. So another version of him started to form. There was Cole in the campaigns, and then there was Cole outside them. At parties, backstage, in quick photos, in scraps of online fashion culture. The runway work made him serious. The off-duty moments made him feel real. When those versions lined up, the image became even stronger. But it also made the line between work and life harder to see. Once fashion starts treating a model's off-duty presence as part of the appeal, the person gets less room to simply exist. A tired face, a bad photo, a strange moment, or a quiet stretch can turn into something people feel allowed to read too closely. The same attention that once feels flattering can become invasive when the mood changes. Cole's silence made that even sharper. He was not out there explaining himself, smoothing things over, or turning his private life into a public brand. That distance protected something, but it also left room for other people to fill in the blanks. During the peak, that mystery made him more compelling. Later, it made people feel allowed to read too much into every gap. Cole Mohr's career makes more sense when viewed through the economics of male modeling. Fashion could rank him, photograph him, and treat him like one of the strongest male faces of the moment, while still giving him a smaller path than the one top female models often had in front of them. By 2013, Forbes listed Sean O'Prey as the highest-paid male model at around $1.5 million. That same year, Gisele Bündchen was earning tens of millions. The difference says a lot about the world Cole was working in. A male model could become important inside fashion, and still be part of a much tighter, quieter business. That kind of gap changes what a career can become. A female supermodel can stretch a peak through beauty deals, celebrity coverage, licensing, interviews, and mainstream recognition. A male model usually has fewer places to go once the biggest editorial and runway attention slows down. Being respected inside fashion can give a model status, but status does not always protect the next season. Cole had another complication. Forbes once used the phrase "image guy" for a model whose power came from a very specific look. Cole fit that idea. He was strong for directional fashion, sharper magazines, and brands that wanted edge. He was not the kind of face that could be dropped safely into every campaign without changing the feeling of it. That was part of the problem. A face like his can define a moment because it refuses to fade into the background. But once the moment changes, the same face can become harder to move somewhere else. A more neutral model can slide into catalog work, fragrance, retail, grooming, luxury basics, or a cleaner kind of commercial image. Cole's face carried too much memory to ever look blank. During the peak, fashion loved that memory. It used the tattoos, the sharpness, the gender tension, the street cast feeling, and the sense that something private was sitting behind the face. Then the seasons moved on. Cole was still Cole, but the market started wanting different signals from the men it placed in front of the camera. There does not need to be one dramatic break for that to happen. A booker can stop calling because the brief has changed. An editor can choose a younger model because the mood feels newer. A designer can leave skinny rock silhouettes behind and move towards something looser, cleaner, or more athletic. No one has to explain it out loud. That kind of quiet shift can be harder to read than a public fall. There is no single scene where the career breaks. The space between major bookings simply gets wider. The name appears less often. People who once treated the model as everywhere start talking about him as someone from another time. For Cole, the same thing that made the rise so sharp also made the slowdown easier for people to turn into a bigger story. His image was never vague, so when fashion started looking somewhere else, the change looked more dramatic than it really was. Cole's peak visibility narrowed through the 2010s, but the work did not simply stop. H&M, GQ China, and Bottega Veneta were still part of his credits. What changed was the pace around him. The runways, campaigns, and editorials were no longer arriving with the same pressure they had during the peak years. That kind of change can look bigger from the outside than it feels on paper. A model can still be working while the public story around him grows quiet. Fashion audiences are trained to follow momentum, and when the momentum slows, they often read it as disappearance. Once that happens, people start looking for a reason. Cole did not give them one. That fit the way he had moved from the beginning. He was never the kind of model who explained himself in long public statements or softened every gap with an interview. The distance that once made him interesting now left people staring at a space they wanted filled. Online gossip filled some of it. Forum comments and anonymous talk began attaching stories to his absence and appearance. None of that became reliable public fact. It stayed what it was, people talking from a distance, trying to turn a quiet career shift into something easier to repeat. A familiar face becomes less visible, and strangers quickly begin building explanations from scraps. One photograph, one rumor, one memory, one old image held against a newer one. For models, that kind of attention can be especially cruel. Their work already invites people to study the body closely. A face gets compared to its younger version. Aging becomes a plot. Weight, skin, hair, posture, and expression get treated like evidence. A person can become a mystery for people who barely know anything beyond the pictures. Cole's slowdown did not need gossip to make sense. He had been a very specific male model, tied closely to a very specific late 2000s mood. He was working in a business that offered fewer long-term paths for male models, and fashion had started moving toward different images. That explanation is quieter than a rumor, so it travels less easily. The way people talked about him also said something about the kind of attention fashion creates. Viewers had loved the image, then wanted an explanation when the image changed. Fashion encourages that feeling by making a model seem publicly available, even when the person behind the image is not. Cole never fully gave people that access. He gave the work. He gave the photographs. The rest stayed with him. The story did not end in that quiet stretch. Cole kept coming back in ways that made the old version of his career harder to repeat. Slada cast him in a world that already made room for people with real presence, not only clean model polish. For Cole, that kind of setting made sense. He could walk in with the history still on him, without pretending the late 2000s had never happened. His archive now holds both the early peak and the later returns. Models.com lists him with icons and top 50 achievements, along with years of work behind him. It also shows recent credits, including Gucci Fall-Winter 2025 campaign work and 2026 entries for Rag & Bone, Public School, and Slada. The profile no longer reads like a closed chapter. It reads like a career that kept moving, even when the attention around it changed. The return feels different because the audience is different now. By the 2020s, the world around Cole's early image had a name people could search, post, and dress around: indie sleaze. Younger viewers found that era through old photos and archive pages. Older viewers remembered it as something they had lived near, even if only through magazines, blogs, and runway clips. Cole stood between memory and revival. But nostalgia can flatten a person. It wants the tattoo, the Dior after-show image, the Marc Jacobs campaign, the runway clip, the face that seems to explain an entire mood. It wants the version that can be pinned to a board and understood quickly. A living person is harder than that. He keeps moving after the image has already been named. Cole's later work proves that movement. He moved past 2008. He aged, reappeared, took new jobs, and stepped into new images, while the old ones still followed him. That is not easy for a model. Fashion often wants someone new, or someone already turned into legend. Cole came back somewhere between those two places. His return also softens the idea that he had vanished. From the outside, the quieter years looked like an ending. In reality, the work had changed shape. It no longer had to move with the same speed as the peak to count as a career. Less visibility was never the same thing as being gone. That misunderstanding says a lot about how fashion teaches people to watch models. A career gets read like a season: arrival, peak, replacement, return. A person's life rarely moves that neatly. Cole Mohr outlived the moment that first made him easy to understand. The era changed. The name came back. The person kept going. Cole Mohr's story could have been shaped into something much simpler. A young model rises fast, becomes the face of a moment, disappears from the center, and turns into a warning about how quickly fashion moves on. That version is easy to follow. It also leaves too much out. The real story is quieter and harder to flatten. Cole became famous inside fashion because he was so specific. The tattoos, the face, the body, and the attitude gave the industry an image it could not create from scratch whenever it wanted. Hedi Slimane gave that image a sharp menswear frame. Marc Jacobs pushed it into a different space. Editors and photographers helped make him one of the faces people still connect with that late 2000s mood. Then the world around the image changed. Male modeling did not give him the same long runway that top female models often had. The mood shifted. Celebrity culture took up more room. New faces arrived with different meanings attached to them. Cole kept working, but the intense attention from the peak years became harder to find. That is why the April, May, June tattoo still lingers. Fashion could photograph it again and again, but the private meaning stayed outside the frame. Cole's career carried that same feeling. The industry could style him, rank him, cast him, revive him, and attach an era to his face. Still, something about him stayed out of reach. That may be the part fashion never knows how to handle. It can make a face feel like a moment. It can bring that moment back years later when the mood returns. It can turn old images into references for a new audience. But it cannot keep a person frozen at the age, shape, and feeling that first made him useful. Cole Mohr never needed to explain every quiet year for the story to hold together. He kept living past the frame that once made him famous. In a world built on replacing its own obsessions, that may be the part that lasts.